I'm really delighted to be here tonight. Thank you, Pearl, for having me, and for those of you who performed in the open mic. It's been a beautiful evening so far, and um, I'm honored to be part of tonight's proceedings. I'm going to begin with a poem that's about wandering around. I did wander a lot when I was a younger man, from one city to another, and I had the idea that I had.
Sorry, I'm gonna fix it.
Yeah.
Stop falling down.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Great. Thank you. I had the idea that if I just kept moving and found the perfect city, that all my problems in life would be solved. So this poem is about the search for that city. The poem is called Utopia, and I mean the word both in the sense that we use it all the time to mean paradise, and in the sense of its literal meaning, which is no place. So, Utopia. Finally, he's found his own city. A postcard place that anyone would like, backlit by the romance of an unknown history. Here, sheets and hair perfume the air. Every gate is hammered silver, every song a song and dance. And the balloon seller bares her ivory shoulder for a kiss. The man who spent enormously to feed a fantasy of being from no place, spent what he had and borrowed more, now is completely happy, except for an idea of an idea that he cannot outpace, that somehow he may have missed something that he should not have missed. Though no doubt this is better than lying on a cold suburban beach, admiring stars so far away he'd be seeing them as they were before the dawn of human speech. This is another country, not an ordinary place, where a man, no matter how exceptional he felt, would finally be erased. I have a little boy named Henry. He's now 6 years old, and reading children's books has been a big part of my literary life for the last 6 years. This poem riffs on a book that I'm sure most or all of you know, which is Goodnight Moon by Margaret Weiss Brown. In case anyone doesn't know the book, it's kind of a lullaby in which the speaker says goodnight to all the things of the world one by one. So, Goodnight Moon. I used to be as unsentimental as anyone could be. Now I'm almost absurd, a clown carrying you on my shoulders, around and around Palmer Square, through the cold night wind as stores lock up and begin closing down. Good night, Fair Trade coffee. Good night, Prada shoes. Good night soon, my little son. You're a toothy, 2-foot-something sumo, a giddy, violent elf jabbing your finger at the moon, which you've begun noticing in the last week or two. Moom, moom. For you, the word ends with a mumming as it begins. For me, beginnings and endings are getting hard to tell apart. There was another child your mom and I conceived, who'd now be reading and teaching you to read, who we threw away when he or she was smaller than a watermelon seed. The chairs, the domestic bears, the clocks, the socks, The house. Once again, a strange cow springs from the green ground, beginning the enormous leap that will carry her above the moon. Though I now live in Baltimore, I grew up in Toronto. And I always had the idea that I was going to move back to Toronto or back to Canada. And the older I get, the less confident I am that that is the direction that my life is going. So this poem is about that. It's also kind of an elegy for old hardbound encyclopedias, which at a certain point I realized were the internet for kids of my generation and all generations before me, but not for kids of my son's generation. So, Ode to an Encyclopedia. Oh, hefty hardcover on the built-in shelf in my parents' living room. Oh, authority on linen paper, molted from your dust jacket, questing beast of blue and gold. You were my companion on beige afternoons that came slanting through the curtains behind the rough, upholstered chair. You knew how to trim a sail and how the hornet builds a hive. You had a topographical map of the mountain ranges on the far side of the moon, and could name the man who shot down the man who murdered Jesse James. At 40, I tell myself that boyhood was all enchantment. Hanging around the railway, getting plastered on cartoons. I see my best friend's father marinating in a lawn chair, smiling benignly at his son and me from above a gin and tonic, or perched astride his roof with carpentry nails and hammer, going at some problem that kept resisting all his mending. Oh, my tome, my paper brother, my narrative without an ending. You had a diagram of a cow broken down into the major cuts of beef, and an image of the Trevi fountain. The boarding house, the church on the corner, all that stuff is gone. In winter, in Toronto, people say, a man goes outside and shovels snow, mostly so that his neighbors know just how much snow he is displacing. I'm writing this in Baltimore. For such a long time, the boy wants to grow up and be at large. But posture becomes bearing. Bearing becomes shape. A man finds that he's made a choice between two countries, believing all the while that he would never have to choose. This next poem is called Wolf. No costume, Red Riding Hood, ever could disguise this jaw, this brush-like tail, this tongue. By now you must be married to a woodcutter, or to a woodcutter's son. But I am still entangled in the forest of your hair. Come back. Get me out of this nightgown, and I'll show you how to raid a chicken coop, how to step around a snare. Only stroke my face again, as if it were one of the remaining wild places of the world. Does it make me a donkey, eating shards of apple from your hand? I'd devour every grandmother in the world to get back into your basket. Look at the savage brambles pasted through my fur. Don't tell me my enormous teeth don't frighten you anymore. My enemy, the moon, looks down at me like a cauterized eye as I creep into the village and softly call your name. Little scholar, little flame, shy girl in a crimson cowl, Let me unfasten the buttons that you've done up to your collar. The shepherd's boy keeps crying wolf because he thinks we'll never come. Red Riding Hood, come help me blow these houses down. It's not like I'm not able to live inside the law. It just makes me crazy seeing little pigs building up their houses of hickory sticks and straw. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of going to my first Renaissance festival. This poem is called Renaissance Faire. But not so much the Renaissance as the Middle Ages. Not so much the Middle Ages as the olden times. Baronets and ladies walk the streets of this mock medieval village, mingling with wizards and with Viking raiders. A druid in the coffee line is eating a bag of deep-fried pickles. Now come the horses for the joust, hung with colors prancing. Now come the knights, some long of tooth and sitting heavy in the saddle. But knights anyway, of equal parts, gentleness and power. This is Camelot at its apogee, where chivalry is figured as a flower. The knights spur forward into a theater of battle. But Camelot would not be Camelot were it not unsound in some way that no enchantment could ever mend. Alas, for all the pageantry that must eventually stutter to an end. For the Scotch eggs and the crab cakes and the slow-roasted mutton shoulder. Alas, for the dads in chainmail pushing their kids uphill in strollers, to cars and SUVs waiting to carry their owners back past gas stations and off-ramps to jobs in Baltimore and D.C., or over the Chesapeake Bay Bridge to the pretty little towns that pack the eastern shore. 8 weeks of the year, the Renaissance is here. There's really nothing much for the other 44. Camelot is what you feel nostalgic for, even before it fades. As a resident in the United States, I feel like and American citizen, I'm a dual citizen. I feel like I can't not write about Donald Trump. I don't really want to, but he makes it so hard not to. So this poem is called The Death of Captain America. Cap will be buried in his costume, in his half-mask, with his bulletproof shield of blue, red, and white. And the invincible Iron Man is inconsolable, now that Captain America is dead. If the man inside the coffin was a symbol, what ideals did he represent? Did he believe in the right to bear arms, or in big government? Was he disfigured from battle? Did he have a schoolboy's face? For some, he was an authoritarian, endowed with physical grace. But this morning, even the paparazzi seem moved by the manly grief of the mighty Thor. What will become of the Pax Americana now that Captain America is dead? If he stormed the beach at Normandy, was he in the shadows at the hanging of Saddam Hussein? Cap's enemy, the Kingpin, is here, leaning on a diamond-encrusted cane. Cap never smoked, never drank, was straight as a bug collector's pin. But many a crooked man will walk a crooked mile now that Captain America is dead. The escalator's been broken since August, the drinking fountains full of cement. Will the train stations descend into ruin now that Captain America is dead? Some people want a moral. Some only a refrain. Some want to go on injuring themselves in the way they have, time and again. But who will speak for the man inside the coffin, his love of slapstick, his wide-open grin? Will anyone speak of the man himself, remembering what was best and worst in him? Into the ground, the indestructible shield, the myth, the one-man legion. Into the ground, the man, the boy, and every toy or comic book that ever pleased him. Into the ground, into the ground, into the ground. Captain America is dead. I'm going to wrap up with two last poems. This one is another riff on a children's book. The poem is just called Children's Book, but the book in question is The Very Quiet Cricket by Eric Carle. Children's Book, in which a newborn cricket walks across a field, unable to reply to the greetings of the mantis and the moth and the dragonfly, until his rubbing of wing on wing becomes a sound that can speak for him. When the last page turns, the book itself makes a chirruping. Here is the church and the steeple. Here is a coffee table where the child lines up a squad of plastic people. Can the child tell the difference between himself and other things? He totters back and forth on a tractor mounted on a spring. Here is the tension of a string pulled tight, and the father rolling over and over and over in the night. The cricket book, after much rough reading, now chirrups nightly on its own. Finally, the father, knowing what must be done, opens up the book with a sturdy paring knife, looking for whatever little engine, whatever little part makes the lifelike cricket sound. Here is the trailer, the baler, the harrow, the plow. Can a stem grow up from inside a stone? Here is how to sit in silence and be alone. Here is the yard where yesterday the child sat watching as blowing branches made and remade daggers of light and shade. The book's voice box to the father's eye looks like a dime-sized bicycle bell, and as he pries it free, the chirruping intensifies, becoming something like the death cry of a creature with an actual beating heart, something like a metal prong banging indifferently on another metal part. And the last poem I'm going to read for y'all is called Walking and Talking. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. Walking and talking. Now that my work's done and it's Saturday, now that my young son is out somewhere with his mom, I might as well roam all morning, spying on the filthy squirrels and on the shapes that disintegrating leaves have painted on the sidewalk. I might as well spend the morning talking to myself, hoping for meaning and unmeaning to braid and begin teaching me what to say. Some days I feel like a monarch at wing, meandering, not really deciding where I go, as programmed as the stubborn birds building nests of twigs and spit. Each bird pipes the song that it was taught and transmits the song to its own offspring. Earthworms driven up by last night's rain have squirmed onto the asphalt to slowly die. I save some who glue and wriggle, but there are just so many. Most I leave to fry. Day by day I'm feeling my way into fatherhood, learning what my son is to me and I to him, my boy, my kid, an 8-toothed homunculus clutching an acorn in his fist, bewildered that a paper plate set down on the grass on a windy day won't stay put, but lofts and spins away. By the time I'm downtown, I'm turning back, in thought, if not yet with my feet. Before I'm back on my own street, I'll have twice walked by the little wedge of ground where people of this neighborhood bury their dead dogs and cats. A rawhide bone, a ball of yarn, waterlogged by the frowsy rain. Animals have never meant very much to me, but I've got them on the brain these days. How magnetic navigation brings spawning salmon home. How predation, variation, and the winnowing down of things gave shape to a world of species, giving them gills, wings, and feet. But I'd rather be dead than be a creature of any other kind. I walk upright, practicing the song of my species by speaking. Thank you.